Hello, I'm Dr. Devra Davis, and I'm here to speak with you about the latest science on 5G and the Internet of Things and what we know about impacts on human health and the environment. For the past 4 decades, I have worked at some of the top echelons of science in the United States and around the world. I was the founding director of the Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology at the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, where I led efforts that ultimately resulted in the ban on smoking in airplanes and the indoor environment. I have worked throughout my career publishing in toxicology and epidemiology and received bipartisan confirmation by the U.S. Senate for presidential appointment. And I've written more than 220 technical articles and 3 popular books, including The Secret History of the War on Cancer and Disconnect, The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation. Today, I'm going to talk with you about a very troubling and persisting environmental pollutant that is not widely recognized, and that is wireless radiation. The radiation limits that we have for microwave radiation today were set in 1996, and those same limits, which were developed in the 20th century, are going to be applied to 5G and other technologies in the 21st century. We believe this is wrong, and we are working with others who share that belief to advance the idea that we have to have a moratorium on 5G because those standards only account for heating effects. They are based on a large plastic empty bowling ball into which fluid is poured and temperatures are checked to see at what point the heat is changed in that bowling ball to a level that is judged by engineers to be adverse to human health. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation has set standards for exposure based solely on avoiding heat and does not take into account the numerous other effects that have been identified. We Are Not SAM is a global campaign that is seeking to raise awareness about the damaging effects of 5G, the lack of safety testing, and is calling for a boycott on 5G until we have safety data. Children's deeper absorption of cell phone microwaves has been documented by our colleagues at Porto Alegre, Claudio Fernandez, Alvaro de Salas, and myself, working with modeling that has been approved by the FDA that looks at 1 millimeter voxels and then models exposure. And you can see from this image here that the radio frequency radiation gets absorbed very deeply into the eyes and to the cheek and into the skull of the child. And in fact, work that we published with these colleagues shows that the eyes of a child will absorb 2 to 5 times more radiation than that of an adult, and that the hippocampus, which is critical to memory, impulse control, and reaction, gets up to 30 times more exposure in a child than compared to an adult. This same imaging has been done here with a tablet, and we should stress that tablets belong on tables. They should not be held near the bodies of young children, whether lying down or on their laps, because again, exposure here to the child just from looking into the screen can result in peak exposures into the nose, to the eyes, to the frontal lobe. And we know that these can be having an effect on the child because they have thinner skulls with more fluid that absorb more microwave radiation. The part of the human body that absorbs the most radiation in the male is the penis, as seen here in this imaging that was conducted also with our colleagues in Brazil. And studies have been done around the world confirming that human male sperm, when exposed to cell phone radiation, develops more damage to the DNA of the sperm. That is why the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, of clinics in Australia and India have for more than a decade told men who want to have healthy babies to get their phones out of their pockets. In addition, exposure is quite high into the colon and rectal area, and that has grave consequences, as we will see in a moment. In my book, Disconnect, which was published in 2010, we talked about the fact that the cell phone industry response to the science was to, quote, war game findings that it did not like, including the finding in 1994 by Henry Lai and Vijay Singh that cell phone radiation could damage the DNA in the nucleus of cells in the brain of rats, exposed at that time to levels of radiation that subsequently became used in cell phones. Further, I want to bring your attention to the fact that the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation, known as ICNIRP, is a small group of invitation-only members that does not report to anybody. And there is no review of that group, and yet they are the group that recommends the standards that have been widely adopted by many nations around the world today. For this reason alone, we call for government limits to be revised. We have filed a historic lawsuit against the FCC, Environmental Health Trust, with 14 different petitioners, one of which is Children's Health Defense, one of whom is Theodora Scarato, another is Cindy Franklin, Elizabeth Barris, Dr. David Carpenter, and a number of others. And in that lawsuit, we are challenging the validity of these 25-year-old standards of the FCC, because you see, those standards affect the phone, the towers, the entire system in which we are now surrounded by microwave radiation. And they have not been revised for 25 years, and they do not take into account a voluminous scientific research showing that cell phone radiation at current levels can damage DNA, can cause a host of other biological effects, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And in our lawsuit, we make it clear that the FCC has violated federal law. It's failed to take into account the environmental impacts of wireless radiation, including that of towers, and it has failed utterly to look at the record in a full, rational, reasoned manner that shows that it took full account of the thousands of scientific studies that were submitted by Environmental Health Trust and by scientists from around the world. The FCC did not establish any effort to look at all of the data, and instead made a ruling that said we can rely on 25-year-old standards to evaluate cell phones, Bluetooth devices, towers, baby monitors, door openers, and a host of other things that are estimated to be part of the 50 billion wireless devices to be connected under the Internet of Things, whether you want it or not. Now, in fact, what has happened is that the judges, in reviewing our case, asked very pointed questions about the failure of the FCC to look into the record in a systematic way, about the failure of the FCC to even consider environmental impacts because the National Environmental Policy Act requires it, and the failure to take into account the Americans for Disabilities Act that protects those with electromagnetic illness who have become refugees with the incredible growth of wireless radiation. This lawsuit seeks to have the FCC change its approach to evaluating these devices, and also expects to encourage industry to develop safer devices. And that's one of the reasons for our lawsuit. Research published with my distinguished colleague, Dr. Anthony B. Miller, and other experts in the field in 2018 looked at all of the data that were established, both experimentally and in human studies, and concluded at that time that we would find the wireless radiation from routers and baby monitors and phones and towers to be a class 1 human carcinogen. And that is a finding that was corroborated by the National Toxicology Program, the flagship program of the United States, as well in more recent studies, as well as by the Ramazzini Institute, that showed that low levels of base station-like radiation can induce extremely rare forms of cancer. And we know that anything that causes an increase in cancer in animals should be considered as a risk to humans, because every known human cause of cancer will produce it in animals when adequately studied. And some of the most important studies in the world have been carried out at the Ramazzini Institute over the past 3 decades. When it comes to concerns about microwave radiation from all of these devices, cancer is the tip of the iceberg. As important studies done in Italy at the Ramazzini Institute have shown, there's a variety of genetic damage, there's effects on reproduction and the weight of the babies that are produced after exposure, there's effects on brain of animals and humans, there's effects on headache, And there's something called oxidative stress, which is the release in the blood of chemicals that can go out and attack other parts of the body. This kind of effect also occurs in animals, according to studies that I'll show you in a moment, in bees and other insects, and as well as effects on trees. Now, you may wonder why you don't know more about this and why it's such a surprise to get this information now. And the answer is provided in part in this Harvard University Law School Center for Ethics report by Norman Ulster that referred to the Federal Communications Commission as a captured agency. That report noted the revolving door where the leaders of the FCC come from and go back to the telecommunications industry. This has been going on in the United States under Democrat and Republican administrations for several decades. And when you look at who pays for the research, with a number of people have done, you find that what the results say often reflects who funded it. Where you sit on the issue depends on who paid for your chair. And increasingly, the public is demanding, and Environmental Health Trust is insisting, that we have independent expert opinions in the research, because what we know is that the big tobacco model of public relations, deny, dismiss, and discredit, continues to operate today. And in fact, some of the same characters that have been involved as scientific experts on behalf of big tobacco have now emerged as experts in the field of cell phone radiation. That is another reason why we have filed our lawsuit seeking independent expert advice, such as that can be provided from leaders around the world who've done research such as that at Ramazzini. An important study on 5G millimeter wave deployment for networks has been published in a technical journal of electrical engineers, an IEEE journal. And what these researchers did was take the current network in Austin, Texas, and show what the current exposures are from the towers that exist that are connecting 4G devices. You can see that in this image here. The next image shows you the dramatic increase in radiation that will take place if and when 5G is fully implemented in Austin, Texas. The researchers, who are themselves electrical engineers, say that the 5G mobile networks cannot yet be classified as safe because the exposures that are involved have the potential to harm the public. We at Environmental Health Trust are calling for a halt in the rollout of the 5G network, a moratorium, and we have proposed making wired connections to and through the premises as a way to avoid microwave wireless radiation throughout the urban environment, which is projected now. And as these engineers have concluded, this would result in levels that cannot be deemed safe. When it comes to understanding what the levels are that we get from phones today, it's very important to be aware that the French government, unlike many other governments, actually tests phones. And they don't just test them in a SAM model, off the body, away from the head. They test them directly next to the body. And when phones are tested next to the body, as this paper published in the IEEE Access by one of the most renowned electrical engineers in the world, Professor Om Gandhi, this paper shows that phones violate even the ICNIRP limits for heat when they are tested at body contact. And what Professor Gandhi did was to take phones that had been shown by the French to exceed those standards for thermal limits and explain that if they were applied to the US limits, that the phones would exceed current US limits up to 11 times. That is to say, current cell phones are emitting more microwave radiation than even the thermal limits allow. And when you tie that together with all the other exposures that we have from laptops and routers and towers, we can see that we are creating a huge public health and environmental problem. One evidence of that problem is a study published by researchers from Yale University on thyroid cancer. Thyroid cancer rates are skyrocketing, as Leonard Hardell has recently reported in another peer-reviewed publication. We don't know why, but we do know this. In this very well done case control study from Yale, they showed that people who had a particular single nucleotide excision repair problem had up to 4 times more thyroid cancer when they used cell phones for an hour a day than those who did not. So if you happen to have this rather common SNP, single nucleotide excision repair problem, then you are much more likely to develop thyroid cancer. And we're seeing that the newer phones are designed with more and more antennas so that they have more radiation going directly into the thyroid gland. Now, further evidence of the capacity of microwave radiation to have profound and subtle effects comes from very important series of studies that were done by our colleagues in Turkey, Suleiman Destek and Suleiman Kaplan, among others. And what they were able to show is that prenatally exposing animals to cell phone radiation results in newborn rats with particular types of damage to the hippocampus, to cells in the brain that are critical to thinking and memory. And in fact, exposed animals have smaller brains and more evidence of brain damage after prenatal exposure. Studies at Yale University have shown that animals' behavior is also affected, and prenatally exposed animals, according to a study by Hugh Taylor, clearly developed what we would call attention deficit in rodents. We also have to ask, could the increases in colorectal cancer in young adults be tied to cell phone radiation? We have reported in a paper published recently, just last year, that young adults aged 24 have had a 4-fold increase in very rare cancers of the rectum in the last decade. And similar increases have now been reported in Brazil, in England, in Iran, and in Egypt. Now, all of those increases are certainly not due to cell phones. There may be a role for pesticides, particularly in Egypt and Brazil, where those are not well regulated. But this increase in such an unusual cancer in young people certainly could plausibly be tied in part to their increased habit of keeping phones close to the body. And as I showed you in the modeling that we've done with our colleagues from Brazil, the rectum does get very high exposure, as does the penis and the testis. And not only that, we show in the recently published paper, just published for the end of last year, that when you radiate rectal cells that you take experimentally, you can actually dramatically increase their growth. They are more sensitive to cell phone radiation. And studies have shown experimentally that the same type of damage that we get from gamma rays, that's X-rays, that's CAT scans and other things, the same type of damage that we get from that kind of radiation is also produced from cell phone radiation when we look at the tissue of rats. Now, this is biological evidence that cell phone radiation can be damaging to the colorectal cells. And now we have this pattern of unexplained increases in this in young adults. I'm one of hundreds of scientists now calling to halt 5G, including many in Italy and around the world, because we recognize that it has not been fully tested for its impact on public health or the environment. This includes a consensus statement from England, international medical and scientific experts, as well as the Hippocrates electrosmog appeal of doctors from Belgium, doctors from Chile, Germany, France, and around the world. A very important study on the damaging effects of cell tower radiation at current levels was produced by colleagues in India, where they took blood from people who lived 80 meters close to cell towers and compared it to those who lived over 300 meters away. And they controlled for their other exposures to other devices. And they concluded that the blood of people who lived closer to towers had more evidence of damage to DNA, had lower levels of glutathione, which is a very powerful part of the body that is involved in repairing damage, that keeps us all healthy, and had increases in peroxidation, that's oxidative stress. That's damage from free radicals. And that is a very important indication all over that the blood of these people who live near towers is more damaged than those who live further away. A recent report produced for the Swiss government, for an expert advisory committee to them, has concluded that there is evidence that cell phone radiation, electromagnetic fields, causes oxidative stress. In studies of experimental studies where we looked at cell cultures and we looked at whole animals exposed under controlled condition, which is the gold standard for how we study drugs or toxic chemicals, those same studies were reviewed. And they also said that those who have pre-existing conditions, such as diabetes or cancer, or those who are very young or the elderly, may be at increased risk from the stress that is caused to the body from these free radicals that are produced by electromagnetic fields. This is a very important study that was led by Professor Mikey Mevison, one of the most distinguished toxicologists in this field, and it is sending shockwaves throughout the community, as it should. When it comes to protecting wildlife, what is quite amazing is that the Federal Communications Commission and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection don't even recognize that there are any studies at all showing damage to birds or insects. They don't even recognize it. They don't even take into account the fact that these limits were not set to protect the most delicate parts of the environment. And research has shown that current levels from 3G and 4G radiation can affect insects, can affect birds and their reproduction, and can affect bees. And the failure to take into account wildlife is a serious problem in setting these standards. It's as though the only organism that is important in the world is the human organism, but we know that without all of the others, we would not survive. If you look at bees, which we know are critical to agriculture, there is evidence that they can resonate with the higher frequencies of 5G. On the slides that you see before you, you see the honeybee and the body of the honeybee, which was modeled with three-dimensional imaging. The 2 gigahertz exposure would be the exposure to current levels, and the exposure is highest on the outside of the body. But 24 gigahertz and 120 gigahertz are levels of millimeter wave frequency that could exist with 5G. And in fact, 5G would rely on 24 gigahertz. And the authors of this article warn that this resonates exactly with the body of the honeybee and can be expected to disrupt its ability to make honey and to live. In fact, other research has found that if you put a cell phone in a honeybee hive and another hive has no phone in it and turn the phone on, those bees will not come back and will stop making honey. There are more than 200 different pollinating insects that are thought to be critical to agriculture, and these may all be affected by 5G radiation. Studies have shown a significant, systematic, damaging effect of this radiation on large trees. Studies of trees have been done by our colleagues in Germany. You can see from this image, on the far left, you see the 2 cell towers. And if you look at the top of the tree carefully, on the right side, which is far away from the tower, the tree is thick and growing well. But on the left side, facing the tower, it's almost like the tree is trying to pull away from the antennas. And the leaves are not thick. And this is a sign of poor health of the tree. And these researchers published this study concluding that there is clear evidence of damage to trees from exposure to cell towers at 3G and 4G. A machine learning analysis that I published with my colleague Malka Haugemoog also shows clear evidence that radiofrequency radiation can damage the capacity of green growing things to do well. Now, we at Environmental Health Trust have been working since 2007, working with colleagues in Italy and around the world to promote awareness of the need to take steps to reduce avoidable environmental health hazards. Electromagnetic fields from towers and phones and toys are huge and unappreciated threat to public health and the environment today. If you want more information, please look at our resources for teachers and parents and children. We're looking forward to working further with the Ramazzini Institute and others as we promote awareness of what the science does show us now. And we take steps to encourage and frankly, to demand that industry produce safer products so that our children can be protected in schools and that we can feel more safe in our homes and the world can be spared the unnecessary exposure to radiation that produces risks and damage to our health and that of trees and bees and the rest of us. Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumors which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC.
The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
It does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.
Did you know that cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation, as long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting?
The American Academy of Pediatrics in over a dozen countries recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation.
When using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this.
To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children.
When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless.
Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure.
For their safety.
For your safety.
Because children are more vulnerable.
Remind them.
Remind yourself.
To limit your microwave radiation exposures.